Interpretatio Christiana is adaptation of non-Christian elements of culture historical facts to the worldview of Christianity. The term is commonly applied to recasting of religious and cultural activities, beliefs and imageries of pagan peoples into a Christianized form as a strategy for the Christianization. From a Christian perspective, pagan refers to the various religious beliefs and practices of those who were neither Christian nor Jewish, including within the Greco-Roman world the traditional public and domestic religion of ancient Rome, Imperial cult, Hellenistic religion, ancient Egyptian religion, Celtic and Germanic polytheism, initiation religions such as the Eleusinian Mysteries and Mithraism, the religions of the ancient Near East, and the religion of Carthage. Reformatting traditional religious and cultural activities and beliefs into a Christianized form was officially sanctioned, preserved in the Venerable Bede's Historia Ecclesiastica Gentis Anglorum as a letter from Pope Gregory I to Mellitus, arguing that conversions were easier if people were allowed to retain the outward forms of the traditions, while claiming that the traditions were in honor of the Christian God, to the end that, whilst some gratifications are outwardly permitted them, they may the more easily consent to the inward consolations of the grace of God. Practices. Reinterpretation of sacred sites. The Christianization of sites that had been pagan occurred both as a result of spontaneous conversions in early Christian times, and an important part of the strategy of Interpretatio Christiana. The landscape itself was Christianized, as prominent features were rededicated to Christian saints, sometimes quite directly, as when the island of Oglassa in the Tyrrhenian Sea was christened Monte Cristo. Missionaries to the pagan nations enthusiastically turned pagan sites immediately over to church use. For example, Sulpicius Severus, in his Vita of Martin of Tours, a dedicated destroyer of temples and sacred trees, remarks, wherever he destroyed heathen temples, that he used immediately to build either churches or monasteries, and when Benedict took possession of the site at Monte Cassino, he began by smashing the sculpture of Apollo and the altar that crowned the height. The letter from Pope Gregory I to Mellitus, copied by Bede, says in part, that the temples of the idols in that nation ought not to be destroyed, but let the idols that are in them be destroyed. Let water be consecrated, and sprinkled in the said temples. Let altars be erected, and relics placed there. For if those temples are well built, it is requisite that they be converted from the worship of devils to the service of the true God, that the nation, seeing that the temples are not destroyed, may remove error from the hearts, and knowing and adoring the true God, may the more freely resort to the places to which they have been accustomed. Reinterpretation of calendar and feasts in the context of Christianization of Germanic tribes. Herbert Schutz notes that eventually old local gods were still celebrated on the feast days, on the former sacred sites, replaced with some particular saints. The letter from Pope Gregory I to Mellitus, copied by Bede, continues thusly, and because they are used to slaughter many oxen in sacrifice to devils, some solemnity must be given them in exchange for this, as that on the day of the dedication, or the nativities of the holy martyrs, whose relics are the deposited, they should build themselves huts of the boughs of trees about those churches which have been turned to that use from being temples, and celebrate the solemnity with religious feasting, and no more offer animals to the devil, but kill cattle and glorify God in the feast, and return thanks to the giver of all things for their abundance, to the end that, whilst some outward gratifications are attained, they may the more easily consent to the inward joys. However, some scholars question the significance of the reinterpretation of pagan feasts, reuse of cultural artifacts in the context of art. Interpretatio Christiana amounted to renaming or unnaming objects, as well as Christian allegorization of them. For example, a Roman cup or vase would be consecrated and used as a chalice in church. A notable example of the latter is the cup of the Ptolemies. Unnaming could include deliberate omission of traditional pagan interpretations of the imagery in descriptions of artifacts, leading to their oblivion, whether intentionally or by ignorance. Crosses were inscribed on old architecture and its reused remnants. Liz James observes, inscribing a cross works similarly, sealing the object for Christian purposes. Martin Hennig describes a number of personal intaglio seals with clearly pagan motifs, augmented with Christian inscriptions, such as IESVSSTAM or MEVS. Reinterpretation of pre-Christian knowledge and law. Pre-Christian sources and myths were subject to Christian reinterpretation during the transmission or placed in Christian settings. This presents difficulties for historical studies of the periods of conversion. A number of early Christian writers noted similarities between elements of Christianity and some pagan traditions, such as cult of Dionysus or Mithras. However, in order to defend Christianity, they insisted that these are plots of the devil to corrupt Christianity. Also, when translating pagan notions into a Christian worldview, pagan deities themselves were reinterpreted as demons. A thorough analysis of Christian reinterpretation of ancient learning was carried out by Hervé Engelbert, with special attention to cosmography, geography, ethnography, and historiography. Scholarship. Humanistic studies of antiquity and the Reformation combined in the 16th century to produce works of scholarship marked by an agenda that was occupied with identifying Roman Catholic practices with paganism, and identifying the emerging Protestant churches with a purgative re-Christianization of society. The Lutheran scholar Philip Melanchthon produced his Apologia Confessionis Augustrae, detailing the rites derived from pagan practices. Heinrich Bullinger, De Origine Auroris Libris Duo, detailed the pagan origins of errors. Isaac Casaubon, De Rebus Sacrae Ecclesiasticus Exercitations, makes the third familiar example, where sound scholarship was somewhat compromised by sectarian pleading. Thus, such pagan precedents for Christian practice have tended to be downplayed or even sometimes dismissed by Christian apologists as a form of Protestant apologetics. The 20th century saw more purely historical inquiries, free of sectarian bias. An early historicist classic in this field of study was Jean Sesnick's The Survival of the Pagan Gods, the mythological tradition and its place in Renaissance humanism and the arts.